Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How should we understand the fast-moving, if not perplexing, political developments in Pakistan, which are clearly going to have ramifications again today and probably likely for the next few days and weeks? That's the key issue I should put today to the highly regarded and world-renowned journalist, commentator and author, Ahmed Rashid. Mr. Rashid joins us from Lahore. Ahmed Rashid, how do you make sense of what happened in Islamabad yesterday? Was it a surprise masterstroke by Imran Khan, or could it end up being a very foolish mistake that will boomerang on him?
What Imran Khan has done, he's plunged the country into a constitutional crisis of enormously large proportions. And there is no saying, for example, if in the next couple of days, the Supreme Court rejects what he has done and rejects the dissolution of the government and the call for fresh elections, that will only deepen the crisis. And, I think he's acted prematurely without thinking of the country. He was facing a no confidence vote, which he probably would have lost, but that is part of the democratic game. And he should have taken part in that, allowed that to happen. But he preempted that by getting this ruling from the deputy speaker of the parliament, who is Imran's own man, which basically relinquished the government. And we now have a full-scale political crisis.
I'll come to the Supreme Court in a moment's time, but first let me ask you, what's your feeling? Do the people of Pakistan believe the story that a fairly junior American official, Donald Lu, was involved in a conspiracy with opposition politicians to unseat Imran Khan? Is that theory of foreign conspiracy widely believed by the people?
No, I don't think so. And even Imran Khan's supporters who are touting this mention of this American diplomat, some of them, a lot of them, don't even believe it, but they know that this is a win. This could be a winning gambit for Iran, so they're going along with it. It's very hard to believe that educated, sensible people in the urban areas would go along with such a decision. But many of these people are in power in the Imran Khan government, and they don't want to lose that power. And they also realize that the step he's taken has been a successful delaying tactic, which has ruled out the idea now of a vote of no confidence and has delayed the whole political process in favor of Imran. So I don't think many people go along with it, but his supporters certainly are touting it as a big win.
Now, the matter is before the Supreme Court, and I believe your Supreme Court will be meeting today at 1 o'clock your time to begin the hearings in the matter, which could go on for several days. Do you have any sense of how the Supreme Court could rule? And I ask because the Deputy Attorney General has gone public and condemned what the government has said. He's resigned, in fact, and said that the government's steps are unconstitutional and indefensible. Is that a sign of how the judges on the Supreme Court bench themselves will think?
I think there's enormous pressure on the Supreme Court. On the one hand, they have the Imran Khan party who carried out this drastic step and want the Supreme Court to endorse what is basically an illegal step. And on the other hand is an opposition and a lot of the public who are looking to the Supreme Court to give a fair judgment, in which would actually be a denunciation of the steps taken by Imran. So the Supreme Court is caught in the middle, as it were, and which way it bends, it may not bend either way and could take some path in the middle. But it is in a very serious crisis. And the fact is that the politicians and Imran's party in particular have plunged the Supreme Court into this crisis when many people believe that political issues should be resolved by Parliament and not by the courts.
So could this end up being a test for the Supreme Court itself?
Yes, certainly. I mean, its judgment is going to be very important, not just for now, but for future elections if they take place and for future governments.
Now, if Imran Khan gets his way, and there's a big if there, is it just the National Assembly that stands dissolved, or might the other four provincial assemblies also end up being dissolved? And the reason I ask is in that little speech he made yesterday, he first talked about assemblyaan, which, as you know, is the Punjabi plural of assembly. And then later on, he said assemblies, which is the English plural. So doubt crept into my mind. Is it just the National Assembly, or could all four go?
Well, at the moment, it seems that Imran Khan is de facto prime minister of the country, but without any cabinet or without any other political appointees supporting him. Now, he's calling for an interim government, which is the normal thing to do when elections are pending. He wants an interim government which will hold the elections. So it's a very confusing state at the moment as to exactly how this is going to unravel. But clearly, the onus is now on the Supreme Court, and which is really not justifiable in the opinion of many people who think that this should have been resolved by Parliament. But we've seen the chaos in Parliament yesterday.
A quick question. Is Imran Khan still on his own prime minister? I believe there was a notice issued by the Cabinet Secretariat pretty late Sunday night that he ceased to be prime minister with immediate effect, which, if it is the case, would be in keeping with your constitutional requirement that when elections are called, a caretaker administration takes over. So does he continue without a cabinet as PM himself, or has he also ceased to be PM?
Well, he continues as long as there's no interim government set up. He has now written to the opposition asking them to cooperate with him in setting up an interim government. The opposition is hardly likely to do that. In fact, the scenes we saw in Parliament, the opposition actually elected, the opposition continued to sit in Parliament even after the government had dissolved it. And they elected their own leaders. And of course, what we have now are potentially two governments which could be operating. An Imran Khan government calling for early elections, and an opposition which is resisting it.
Tell me, in this very confusing, perplexing situation, how do you view the army's position? I know that the army spokesman issued a statement or spoke to GeoTV to say that the army wasn't involved and had nothing to do with what had happened in the assembly. But does that sum up the army's position, or is there more to it that we don't know about?
Well, I think the Imran certainly asked a few days ago, it was reported that Imran asked for support from the military, which seemed, and the military gave him three options, but he seems to have not got the support that he certainly had when he fought the last elections, in which it was widely assumed that the army played a role in getting him to win the elections. This time it's not the case, and the army has made it very clear that it is not involved in the present crisis. It has not chosen any kind of favorite that it wants to see elected as prime minister, or even for Imran to continue as prime minister. And actually, this whole political mess comes as a surprise and as quite dangerous for the army. They don't want to see the country polarized as it is now. They don't want to see these hard decisions being made, which embarrass both the army and the government.
Side by side with the political developments, there was a pretty significant speech made by General Bajwa on Saturday, on the second day of the Islamabad Security Dialogue. Let me briefly, before you leave me, refer to that. First of all, General Bajwa spoke very warmly about America, which is distinctly different to the way the Prime Minister Imran Khan views America at the moment. And secondly, General Bajwa went out of his way to use the word aggression to refer to what Russia has done in Ukraine. Again, very different to the way the Imran Khan government has viewed the Ukraine crisis. Are there signs here of a foreign policy shift that the army would like to see, and a sign of difference with Imran Khan?
Well, the army has been making foreign policy ever since Imran came into office. And what we have seen now is that the army is taking the lead in trying to have a more balanced foreign policy to condemn the Russian atrocities that it has carried out in Ukraine and be part of international support. There's been enormous pressure on Pakistan, as there has been on India, by Americans, by NATO, the European Union, to change their line and to support resolutions in the United Nations which condemn Russia, which is something Pakistan and India have both abstained from doing. So we have now this domestic crisis is also part of an international crisis that both countries face, but in particular Pakistan faces, because it has many other debts to owe the Americans with, including loans from the IMF, loans from other countries, a very dire economic situation, which is increasingly pointing towards bankruptcy of the Pakistan economy, so a change in being able to stabilize Pakistan's relations with foreign powers, especially the United States, is vitally important. And this is something clearly the army now recognizes.
So in a nutshell, am I right in understanding you to say that General Bajwa would like to see a warmer, closer relationship with America that Imran Khan has delivered, particularly in recent weeks?
Certainly, and he would like to see a balanced relationship between China and the US, both of which are Pakistan's allies. He does not want to, the Americans presume that Pakistan is now firmly in the China camp, but I think what we will see is a more balanced foreign policy now, and certainly in the next 3 months, the army will be guiding foreign policy more than any interim government or whatever government comes into power.
Speaking about India, General Bajwa began by saying that the situation on the line of control was satisfactory and fairly peaceful. Then he went on to say something that I thought was very significant, and I'm quoting him. Pakistan continues to believe in using dialogue and diplomacy to resolve all outstanding issues, including the Kashmir dispute, and is ready to move forward on this front if India agrees to do so. How do you read that?
Well, it must be said that, General Bajwa, in his conversations with senior ambassadors and diplomats in Islamabad, his trips abroad, and his private statements to other heads of state, have emphasized the fact that Pakistan wants to resume a dialogue with India as quickly as possible. And he quotes Indian reluctance to do so. So I think this is a very a positive development. Pakistan wanting to be seen as a peacemaker rather than as a belligerent. And there, of course, has been control asserted against cross-border attacks by Kashmiris, by other militant groups, etc. And there's a campaign against militancy in Pakistan, which has been going on for some time, has not proved very successful, but it continues to be carried out by the military, who've lost significant numbers of people against all sorts of militant groups, including the Pakistani Taliban. So I think we have a change of perception in Islamabad. The army wanting to dialogue with India and insisting to its interlocutors in private conversations that India is not giving any room for a dialogue to take place. If you remember, a few months ago, there was a private dialogue between the intelligence chiefs of the two countries, but unfortunately, that doesn't seem to have led anywhere.
Can I interrupt and say that did lead to the resumption of the 2003 ceasefire, which General Bajwa acknowledged on Saturday has held very successfully, and the Indian government also acknowledges that the ceasefire has held very successfully, and it's now 14 months old. Shortly after the ceasefire, there was speculation at your end, and it was picked up at our end as well, that there might be a certain resumption of trade, particularly, I believe, wheat and cotton. It was, if I recall the story correctly, approved by the Economics Committee, but scuppered by the cabinet. And it was believed that that was something the army wanted to push, but Imran didn't. Now you're suggesting that, in fact, General Bajwa is once again talking about improving relations, pushing forward, and he wants to see a reciprocal response from India.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think, as far as Pakistan is concerned, the failure has been the reluctance of India to come to the table. You're right, of course, about the agreement that has been, agreements on the line of control that have been made. But these are, continuations of past agreements. They're not really breaking new ground. And what is really badly needed for both countries is to break new ground. The issue of trade can't be one-sided. I mean, Pakistan would love to buy goods much cheaper from India, especially staples like wheat and vegetables and other things. But this is not going to happen until, again, there is some reciprocal lead taken by India in allowing Pakistan trade concessions and be willing to buy from Pakistan.
You're making a very important point. The reciprocal concessions that they would look for from India would be in terms of trade. Imran Khan had made the August 5th, 2019 change in status of Kashmir a sticking point. He said nothing could happen with India unless Modi reversed that. It's very unlikely Modi will reverse it. Are you suggesting General Bajwa may not insist on the reversal of 2019? He'd look to find other concessions so that we can move on together.
Well, I think that's a strong possibility of what the military is now seeing, because they understand at one level that they cannot betray, as it were, the Kashmiri people, and they have to stand up for the rights of the Kashmiris. But at the same time, they don't want to jeopardize Pakistan's lack of policy vis-a-vis India and India's lack of policy vis-a-vis Pakistan. They want to see some progress in that. So I think if India was to offer concessions, political, economic, whatever, I think they would be reciprocated very quickly and positively by Pakistan.
My last question, given the differences which we've discussed in relations with America compared with Imran Khan, General Bajwa wants a better relationship. For Imran, it's a sticking point, and during the campaign, if there is one for a new election, this is going to be a key issue Imran whips up, which will further deteriorate the relationship with America. And similarly, given the different way the general and the prime minister view the relationship with India, would the army welcome Imran returning to power? It seems that on these two critical issues, leave aside the handling of the economy or the Taliban or Afghanistan, the differences between the army and the army chief on the one hand and Imran are fairly sizable. So would they welcome Imran returning to power?
Well, I think the only indication is that the army was not prepared to give Imran any political backing for these elections. And they left him on his own to deal with the elections and to deal with the opposition. We've seen the result of that. It's been disastrous for Pakistan. It's plunged the country into a constitutional crisis. So I think the distancing of the army has been very significant, and it has played a lead role. And clearly there are issues where Imran, had supported the appointment of the former ISI chief as being as continuing as the ISI chief. Yeah, I mean, and it was basically rejected by the army chief, who didn't want any interference in the appointments within the top ranks of the military. So I can only speculate. I don't have any inside information as to what General Bajwa is thinking, but I can certainly presume that the army is very upset about the present political mess that has ensued in the country.
Ahmed Rashid, thank you very much for joining us and explaining to us how you view what I called earlier, the confusing, perplexing situation, which will have ramifications not just through the day today, but the days and weeks to come. Thank you very much indeed for this. Take care. Stay safe.